My name is Max Walker, and I'm 71 years old. I'm writing this from a hospice facility in Bend, Oregon, where the nurses think I spend my days watching old westerns and sleeping through lunch. They don't know that I'm finally ready to tell the truth about what happened to me 40 years ago. In 1984, I disappeared into the Mount Hood wilderness for 5 days. The official story was that I fell while photographing wildlife, broke my leg, and survived alone until search and rescue found me. My wife, Linda, believed that story until the day she died. My colleagues at National Geographic accepted it without question, but I didn't survive alone. I spent a weekend with a Bigfoot, learning things about my own species that I've carried like lead weights in my chest ever since. I was trapped there at first, injured and helpless. But what I witnessed changed everything I believed about nature, about documentation, about what we owe to beings that want nothing from us except to be left alone. People ask me why I'm telling this now, after keeping silent for 4 decades. The answer is simple. I'm dying. The cancer started in my pancreas 8 months ago and spread faster than anyone expected. I have maybe 6 weeks left, possibly less. My son Jason found my old recording equipment last week while helping me sort through belongings. He listened to enough of the audio files to know I've been lying to him for his entire adult life. He deserves the truth. Maybe you do too. I was a wildlife photographer, specialized in getting shots that other photographers couldn't or wouldn't attempt. I spent years pursuing animals into their most private moments, documenting behaviors that required me to push boundaries and ignore the stress I caused. It was aggressive work, intrusive and precise, perfect for someone who measured his worth by the images he captured. I threw myself into photography with the kind of obsession that people mistake for passion. I worked alone, often for weeks at a time, camping in remote areas where nobody could tell me I was going too far. I told myself I was educating the public. Really, I was feeding my ego. In September of 1984, I found something in those mountains that wasn't supposed to exist. A Bigfoot, injured and scared, who saved my life, even though my species had given it every reason to let me die. Something that taught me more in 3 days than I'd learned in 31 years of living. I never took photographs. I kept only audio recordings that I've hidden for 4 decades. I made a promise in those mountains, and I've honored it until now. This is what happened during that weekend. This is what I learned. This is why some beings have earned the right to remain hidden, and why I'm breaking my silence anyway. I was 31 in 1984, recently successful and professionally ambitious in that hollow way people are when they're compensating for everything else they've ruined. My career at National Geographic was thriving, not because of talent alone, but because I was willing to do things other photographers refused. I'd built my reputation on boundary-pushing work, close-ups of wolf dens that required me to wait mere feet from protective mothers, grizzly feeding behavior captured from distances that made my editors nervous, birthing sequences that required me to insert myself into moments that should have remained private. The work won awards. It also destroyed things. Earlier that year, I'd disturbed a wolf den while trying to photograph newborn pups. The mother abandoned the site because of my presence. 3 pups died within a week. The Wildlife Service investigated, found no legal violations, but the incident followed me. Some colleagues started calling my methods into question. I told myself they were jealous, that great photography required sacrifice, that the images I captured educated millions and justified any temporary stress to individual animals. I was lying to myself, but I believed it completely. My marriage to Linda was falling apart in slow motion, not because of fights or betrayal, but because I was never actually present. Even when I was home, I was planning the next expedition, reviewing footage, pitching new stories. Linda had learned to expect nothing from me except occasional appearances between assignments. Our son Jason was 6 years old. He barely knew me. I'd missed his last 2 birthdays chasing assignments. When I was home, I was the stranger who slept in Mom's room and left camera equipment all over the house. Linda stopped asking me to stay. Jason stopped running to greet me when I returned. They'd learned to function as a family of 2, with me as an occasional guest who brought interesting stories and nothing else. I told myself I was providing for them, that my work mattered more than soccer games and bedtime stories, that Linda understood the importance of what I did. The truth was simpler and uglier. Photography was easier than being a husband or father. Nature didn't judge me. Animals didn't need emotional availability. Behind a camera, I could control everything, document everything, never have to be vulnerable or present. I chose my work because it protected me from having to be a real person. My philosophy back then was straightforward. Nature existed to be documented. Animals were subjects, not individuals. If my presence disturbed them temporarily, that was acceptable cost for the greater good of education and awareness. I genuinely believed I was doing important work, that my images connected people to wilderness they'd never experience otherwise, that the ends justified the means. I'd spent my entire adult life perfecting the art of getting what I wanted from nature without considering what it cost. That philosophy was about to be tested in ways I couldn't imagine. September 1984 arrived with unusual heat. I'd been planning a story on Pacific Northwest, megafauna for months, pitching it to Geographic as a comprehensive survey of bears, elk, and wolves in the Cascade region. They approved the budget and gave me 3 weeks. But that wasn't my real assignment. The real goal was something I'd never admitted to my editors. I wanted to document evidence of Sasquatch, not as a believer, but as an opportunist. If I could get even ambiguous footage, it would be the biggest story of my career. I'd spent months researching reports from the Mount Hood wilderness, footprint sightings, vocalizations, tree structures that locals attributed to Bigfoot. Most were probably hoaxes or misidentifications, but the sheer volume of reports from one specific drainage suggested something was there. I packed my standard camera equipment plus something new, experimental audio recording gear that Geographic had acquired for a different project. Directional microphones, cassette recorders, equipment designed to capture animal vocalizations from distance. If Bigfoot existed and made sounds, I'd have proof even without photographs. I drove to the Mount Hood area on a Friday morning, telling Linda I'd be back in 10 days. Jason was at school. I left without saying goodbye to him, the way I always did. Linda kissed my cheek with the resigned affection of someone who'd stopped expecting more. I parked at a ranger station and registered a vague hiking plan. Told them I'd be surveying the wilderness area, staying mobile, probably out of contact. They nodded without concern. I'd done this dozens of times before. Then I hiked in, going off trail after the first mile. I had topographic maps marked with the locations of reported Bigfoot activity. I was heading for a remote valley where 3 separate witnesses had described encounters over the past 2 years. The forest was dense, old-growth Douglas fir and western hemlock, the kind of wilderness where you could disappear and nobody would find you unless you wanted to be found, perfect for a creature that had avoided definitive documentation for centuries. I set up camp in a clearing near a stream, arranged my recording equipment in a perimeter, microphones pointed in different directions, started documenting ambient sounds, building a baseline for comparison. That first night, I heard nothing unusual. Elk calls, owl vocalizations, wind through trees, normal forest sounds. The second day, everything changed. I was checking one of my microphones when I saw them, tracks in soft mud beside the stream, massive, bipedal, each print showing 5 toes and a distinctive arch. Fresh enough that water was still seeping into the impressions. Bigfoot tracks, unmistakable, real. My heart was racing as I photographed them from multiple angles, measured them 15 inches long, 7 inches wide. Far too large for any human, wrong shape for a bear. I'd found what I was looking for. Now, I just had to find the Bigfoot itself. I started following the tracks immediately, abandoning my campsite and any pretense of systematic survey work. This was it, the opportunity I'd been chasing. Every instinct I'd developed as a photographer kicked in. Move quietly, stay downwind, be ready for the shot. The tracks led deeper into the wilderness, away from any established trails. Up a ridgeline, then down into a narrow valley I hadn't explored before. The Bigfoot was moving with purpose, not wandering randomly. It knew where it was going. I followed for hours, checking my compass occasionally, but mostly focused on the trail. The tracks were easy to follow in the soft forest floor. Twice I found places where the Bigfoot had stopped, impressions deeper where it had stood still. Once I found hair caught on a low branch, coarse and dark. I bagged it carefully. I was so focused on the pursuit that I didn't pay attention to my own path, didn't mark my route, didn't consider how I'd get back. That kind of caution was for amateurs. The tracks led to a rocky area, bare stone and scattered boulders. I lost the trail on the hard surface, spent 20 minutes searching for where the Bigfoot had continued, found nothing. I decided to climb higher, get a vantage point, see if I could spot movement in the valley below. There was an outcropping about 30 feet up that would give me a perfect view. I started climbing, testing each handhold. I'd done this kind of thing hundreds of times. The rock felt solid. I pulled myself up to a ledge, reached for the next hold. The stone gave way. I felt it crumble under my hand, felt myself falling backward, grabbed for anything, found nothing, hit the slope hard, started rolling, bounced off a boulder, kept falling. I slammed into the ravine bottom 20 feet below, heard something snap in my leg, felt pain explode through my entire body. My head hit rock, and the world went white. When the pain faded enough for me to think, I tried to move. My left leg was broken, badly. I could see the unnatural angle even through my pants. My camera was smashed beside me, film scattered across the rocks, but my audio recorder, attached to my belt, was still running, still intact. I could hear the tape spinning, capturing my breathing, my gasps of pain. I tried to sit up, nearly passed out from the agony in my leg, looked around, assessed my situation. I was at the bottom of a ravine, surrounded by steep walls. My camp was miles behind me. Nobody knew exactly where I'd gone. My radio was back at camp. My emergency beacon was in my pack, also back at camp. I had a water bottle on my belt and nothing else useful. I'd been pursuing Bigfoot. Now I was going to die because of that pursuit. The irony wasn't lost on me, even through the pain. I'd spent my career chasing nature aggressively, pushing boundaries, ignoring risks. Nature was finally pushing back. Night fell faster than it should have, or maybe I was passing in and out of consciousness. The pain in my leg was constant, sharp enough to make me nauseous. I'd managed to drag myself against a boulder, get my back supported. But that was all I could do. I was going into shock. I recognized the symptoms from wilderness first aid training. Cold, despite the September warmth, confusion. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. I needed water, needed to stabilize my leg, needed to get warm, but I couldn't do any of those things, could barely think through the pain. That's when I heard it. Movement in the darkness beyond my limited vision, something large stepping carefully across the rocks. The hair on my neck stood up, some ancient instinct recognizing predator presence. I fumbled for my flashlight, got it pointed at the sound. The beam caught something massive pulling back into shadows. 8 feet tall, easily. Covered in dark hair, moving on 2 legs. Bigfoot. I'd found it, or it had found me. I tried to reach for my backup camera, the small one in my vest pocket. My hands wouldn't cooperate. The flashlight slipped, clattered on the rocks. The Bigfoot made a sound, low and resonant, not threatening, but not friendly either. Wary. I heard it moving, circling my position in the darkness, watching me. I wanted to call out, to communicate somehow, but my voice wasn't working right. I managed a weak sound, barely more than a groan. The Bigfoot went quiet. I lay there in the dark, listening to my own breathing, wondering if this was how I died, injured and alone, killed by the very thing I'd been chasing. Then the sounds moved away, the Bigfoot leaving. I was alone again. I must have passed out because I lost time. When I came back to awareness, dawn light was filtering into the ravine. I was freezing, shaking violently. But something had changed. My sleeping bag was draped over me. My water bottle was within reach, though I hadn't had it before. My first aid kit from my vest was laid out on a flat rock beside me. I hadn't done those things. I couldn't have. My leg was still broken, still positioned exactly as it had been. The Bigfoot had come back. While I was unconscious, it had gone through my gear, found what I needed to survive, brought those things to me. It had saved my life. I looked around the ravine, searching for it, saw nothing. But I felt watched, that persistent sensation of eyes on me. Then I saw it, partially hidden behind a rock formation about 50 feet away. The Bigfoot was there, standing perfectly still, watching me. We stared at each other across the distance. I raised one hand slowly, not threatening, just acknowledging. The Bigfoot didn't move closer. Didn't leave either. Just watched, like it was deciding what to do with me. By mid-morning, I was more lucid, though the pain hadn't decreased. I'd managed to drink some water, which helped. My leg was still broken in at least 2 places, but I was thinking more clearly. That's when I realized my leg had been stabilized. Someone had created a rough splint using sticks and torn fabric. Not medical grade, but functional. Enough to prevent the break from getting worse. I hadn't done that. I'd been unconscious. The Bigfoot had made it. Had created a tool, problem solved, applied first aid to an injured creature from a species that wasn't its own. I examined the splint more carefully. The sticks were uniform length, carefully selected. The fabric was torn from what looked like an old piece of cloth, weathered and faded, not from my gear. The Bigfoot had brought its own materials. This wasn't animal behavior. This was intelligence, empathy, intentional care. I looked back toward where I'd last seen the Bigfoot. It was still there, still watching from safe distance. I could see it more clearly now in better light. Massive shoulders, long arms, face partially obscured by hair, but showing features that weren't quite human, weren't quite ape. While I watched, the Bigfoot moved slightly, deliberately made itself more visible. It wanted me to see it, wanted me to know it was there. Then it stepped back, disappeared behind the rocks. I heard movement, something being dragged or carried. A few minutes later, something rolled into view from the direction the Bigfoot had gone, a piece of bark, curved and shaped like a rough bowl. Inside, food. Berries still fresh with morning dew, edible roots cleaned of dirt, fish, 2 of them, recently caught and killed but not cooked. The Bigfoot had brought me breakfast. I crawled forward carefully, keeping weight off my broken leg. Retrieved the bark bowl, examined the contents. Everything looked safe, identifiable species I recognized from field guides. I ate the berries first, then tried the roots. Both were fine, exactly what I needed. The fish I was less sure about. Eating raw salmon carried risks, but I was hungry enough that I didn't care. While I ate, I watched where the Bigfoot had gone. It hadn't reappeared, but I knew it was close. Could feel that watched sensation, that persistent awareness of its presence. It had saved my life, stabilized my injury, and now it was feeding me. Every action calculated to keep me alive without getting too close. I thought about what that meant. The Bigfoot could have left me to die, could have ignored my suffering completely. Instead, it was caring for me, protecting me, ensuring I survived. But it wouldn't come near me, stayed at distance, never closer than 30 or 40 feet, like it was afraid, not of what I was now, broken and helpless, but of what humans were in general. The second day brought more of the same pattern. The Bigfoot would appear at distance, leave food and water, retreat immediately. I tried several times to communicate, calling out in what I hoped was a non-threatening voice. Each time I spoke, the Bigfoot would make sounds in response, but they weren't friendly sounds. They were distressed, almost fearful. Vocalizations that made it clear my voice caused anxiety. I started paying closer attention to the Bigfoot's behavior during these exchanges. The way it moved, always staying beyond a certain distance. The way it watched me constantly, tracking every movement I made. The way it flinched if I moved too quickly or reached for anything. This wasn't caution. This was trauma response. By afternoon, I'd dragged myself to a better position where I could see more of the ravine. That's when I noticed the details I'd missed before. The Bigfoot's body was covered in scars. Even from 50 feet away, I could see lines of damaged tissue across its shoulders and back. One arm moved stiffly, compensating for some old injury that hadn't healed properly. I pulled out my small notebook, the one that had survived the fall, started documenting what I was seeing. Not for publication, just to process what I was witnessing. The Bigfoot appeared again near sunset, bringing more food. This time it stayed visible longer, like it was becoming comfortable with the routine. I kept my hands visible, made no sudden movements. That's when I saw the worst of the injuries. The Bigfoot turned slightly, adjusting its position, and I saw its right hand clearly for the first time. 2 fingers were missing, old wounds long healed, not birth defects. These were traumatic amputations. I could see the scar tissue where the fingers had been severed. More scars crossed its chest, visible even through the hair. Long lines that looked like they came from claws or teeth, except the pattern was wrong. Too straight, too uniform. Cut marks, made by blades. On the Bigfoot's left leg, I saw burns. Patches where the hair had never grown back, skin shiny and damaged. The pattern suggested fire, probably from burning wood or embers. These weren't natural injuries. These weren't wounds from fighting other animals or accidents in the forest. Humans had done this. People had shot at the Bigfoot, cut it, burned it, caused enough trauma to leave permanent damage across its entire body. I understood then why it kept its distance, why it brought me food but wouldn't come close, why my voice made it anxious and my movements made it flinch. The Bigfoot had learned, probably through repeated painful experiences, that humans were dangerous, that getting close to us led to injury or death. But despite that knowledge, despite every reason to leave me here to die, it was keeping me alive. It had more compassion than I'd ever shown anything in nature, more empathy than I'd demonstrated in my entire career. I was being cared for by a being that had every reason to hate my species. I'd been documenting wildlife for nearly a decade, but I'd never really thought about what that word meant. Documentation, taking from nature without giving back, capturing images that served my purposes without considering the cost to the subjects. Now I was on the other side. I was the one being observed, being helped, being kept alive by a being that owed me nothing. My audio recorder had been running almost constantly, capturing everything. The Bigfoot's vocalizations, the sounds of it moving around the ravine, my own observations narrated, quietly. I'd started doing that the first day, speaking my thoughts aloud for the recorder. It felt important to document this, even if I never shared it, to have some record of what was happening. The Bigfoot seemed to accept my quiet narration. As long as I kept my voice low and didn't make sudden movements, it would stay visible, going about its routines while I watched. I saw it fishing in the stream that ran through the ravine, saw how it would stand motionless in the water, waiting with perfect patience. When a fish came close enough, the Bigfoot's hand would strike faster than I could track. Quick, efficient, practiced, it never took more than it needed. Caught 2 fish, left the rest alone. Brought one to me, kept one for itself. I watched it eat, 50 feet away. The Bigfoot sat on a flat rock, tearing the fish apart with its damaged hand, eating methodically, not wastefully. When it finished, it buried the remains, covering them with rocks and dirt. Sanitation practices, environmental awareness, behavior that suggested understanding of ecosystem impact. That night, the temperature dropped. I was shaking in my sleeping bag, cold enough that I couldn't sleep despite exhaustion. My broken leg throbbed with each heartbeat. I heard the Bigfoot moving closer in the darkness, heard it breathing, heavy and deliberate. It was nearer than it had been during daylight, maybe 20 feet away. I didn't move, didn't speak, just lay still and listened. The Bigfoot made a low sound, almost like a rumble. Then I heard something else, movement in the forest beyond the ravine, something large prowling. Cougar, probably, or bear, predators that would investigate an injured human without hesitation. The Bigfoot made another sound, louder this time, a warning vocalization that echoed off the ravine walls. The prowling sounds stopped, then retreated. Whatever was out there decided against coming closer. The Bigfoot was protecting me, standing watch through the night, keeping other predators away from something that couldn't defend itself. I realized something then, lying in the dark with my legs screaming pain and a Bigfoot guarding me from dangers I couldn't see. This being wasn't helping me because it was curious. It wasn't studying me or using me for some purpose. It was protecting me because it couldn't do otherwise. Despite everything humans had done to it, despite the scars and missing fingers and burn marks, the Bigfoot couldn't let me die. That said something profound about its nature and something devastating about mine. The third morning brought a change. I woke to find the Bigfoot closer than it had ever been, maybe 30 feet away, close enough that I could see its face clearly in the dawn light. The features were striking, more human than I'd expected, but different in ways I couldn't quite articulate. Deep-set eyes that showed intelligence and something else, something like sadness. A broad nose, heavy brow ridge. The mouth was hidden behind. Hair, but I caught glimpses when it moved. The Bigfoot was looking directly at me, not just observing, but making deliberate eye contact, wanting me to see something. I stayed completely still, barely breathing. Let the moment develop without interference. The Bigfoot slowly turned its body, showing me its left side. The movement was deliberate, intentional. It was displaying its injuries, making sure I saw them clearly. The bullet wounds were obvious now. 2 scars across the shoulder, entry and exit points. The tissue had healed badly, creating puckered ridges. The Bigfoot touched these scars with its good hand, traced the path the bullets had taken. Then it showed me the burns on its leg, ran its fingers across the damaged skin, making a sound that needed no translation. Pain, remembered, trauma that hadn't faded. The missing fingers came next. The Bigfoot held up its damaged hand, showed me the stumps where 2 fingers had been, made a cutting motion with its other hand, demonstrating how the injury had occurred. These weren't natural losses. Someone had done this deliberately. Cut off the Bigfoot's fingers, probably with a blade or axe. The Bigfoot touched each injury in sequence, making vocalizations between each one. The sounds were mournful, resonant with grief. It was telling me a story, showing me a history written in scar tissue and missing parts. "This is what humans do," the Bigfoot seemed to be saying. "This is why I'm afraid of you. This is what your species has taught me to expect." I felt something break inside me, some comfortable lie I'd been telling myself about human relationship with nature. We were the stewards, the documentarians, the ones who appreciated and protected wilderness. But we were also the ones who shot at things we didn't understand, who burned and cut and destroyed out of fear or sport or simple cruelty. The Bigfoot lowered its hand, made a sound I'd learned to recognize as a question, an inquiry. It was asking me something, wanting to know if I understood, if I saw what it was showing me. I spoke quietly, keeping my voice low. "I see. I understand. I'm sorry for what they did to you." The Bigfoot tilted its head, processing my words. It couldn't understand English, but maybe it understood tone, intent. It made another sound, softer this time. Then it pointed past me, toward a section of the ravine I hadn't explored. It wanted to show me something else, something more. I nodded, understanding. The Bigfoot moved slowly, painfully. Its injured arm made movement difficult, but it led the way, pausing frequently to make sure I was following. I started crawling, dragging my broken leg. Every movement was agony, but I had to see what the Bigfoot wanted to show me. The crawl took over an hour. My broken leg screamed protest with every movement. The Bigfoot stayed ahead of me, moving slowly, waiting when I needed to rest, leading me deeper into the ravine toward something it considered important. We reached a small clearing where the ravine widened slightly. The morning sun filtered through the trees overhead, creating dappled light on the forest floor. That's where I saw them. Stone markers, deliberately placed in a rough circle. 3 of them, each about 2 feet high, stacked carefully, balanced with obvious intention. Graves. The Bigfoot approached the markers slowly, reverently, knelt beside the smallest one, touched it with gentle fingers, made a sound so filled with grief that I felt it in my chest. These were its people. Its family, probably. Buried here in the mountains, marked with stones the way humans marked their own dead. The Bigfoot sat beside the smallest marker for a long time. I stayed back, giving it privacy, witnessing but not intruding. The graves varied in size. The largest marker probably indicated an adult, maybe 8 feet tall when living. The middle size suggested another adult, slightly smaller. The smallest marker was maybe 4 feet high. A child. The Bigfoot had lost a child. It touched each marker in turn, spending the most time with the smallest, making vocalizations that sounded like names or prayers or simply expressions of loss too deep for any language to contain. I understood then what this place meant. This wasn't just a burial site. This was evidence of family structure, of mourning practices, of belief systems that extended beyond immediate survival. The Bigfoot returned here regularly, maintained the markers, sat with the dead, remembered what it had lost. These weren't animal behaviors. These were rituals that implied culture, spirituality, understanding of death as something more than absence. After maybe 20 minutes, the Bigfoot stood, looked at me directly, made sure I was watching. Then it made a gesture toward the graves, then toward itself. The last one, it seemed to be saying. I'm the last one here. Everyone else is gone. It pointed toward the markers again, then made a motion I recognized. Shooting. It mimicked someone holding a rifle, pointed it toward each grave. Humans killed them. People with guns had hunted the Bigfoot's family, killed them all. This survivor was the only one left in this area. The smallest marker, the child, the Bigfoot touched one more time, made a sound that transcended species. Grief was grief, regardless of what form it took. I thought about my own son, Jason, 6 years old, growing up without a father who cared enough to be present. What would I feel if someone took him from me? What rage, what sorrow, what permanent damage would that cause? The Bigfoot had experienced that, had lost not just one child, but everyone, its entire family, its entire community, destroyed by humans who saw them as threats or trophies or simply targets. And despite that loss, despite that trauma, the Bigfoot was keeping me alive, was protecting me, feeding me, caring for me, even though I belonged to the species that had murdered its family. I understood now why it kept its distance, why it helped, but wouldn't come close, why my voice made it anxious. The Bigfoot wasn't avoiding humans because it didn't understand us. It was avoiding us because it understood us perfectly. We stayed at the burial site for another hour. The Bigfoot seemed to need the time to process something or gather strength. I sat against a tree, keeping weight off my broken leg, and watched it mourn. I thought about my camera equipment back at my camp, the photographs I'd planned to take, the documentation I'd intended to create, career-defining images of Bigfoot, proof that would make me famous and wealthy. This is what that proof would look like. A grieving being sitting beside the graves of its murdered family, showing me its scars, demonstrating the cost of human curiosity and human violence. If I published that story, if I brought the world here, what would happen? More curiosity, more hunters, more people wanting to see for themselves. The Bigfoot would be pursued, captured, studied, or killed, more likely, eliminated as a threat or a prize. My documentation would lead directly to this being's death. I looked down at my hands, at the notebook I'd been using to record observations. Thought about the audio recorder still running on my belt, capturing everything. I was creating evidence right now, building a case for Bigfoot's existence with every note, every recording, doing exactly what I'd come here to do. But watching this being grieve, understanding what it had already lost, I felt something shift inside me. Some fundamental assumption about my rights and my purpose cracking apart. The Bigfoot stood finally, made a gesture toward me. Time to go back. It led the way slowly, accommodating my injured crawl. When we reached the area where I'd been resting, the Bigfoot paused, looked at me directly, then at my notebook and recorder. It made a sound, questioning. I understood what it was asking. What are you doing with those? What will you do with what you've learned here? I couldn't answer in words it would understand, but I made a decision right then. I picked up my notebook, held it where the Bigfoot could see. Then I mimed tearing pages, destroying them. Universal gesture for elimination. The Bigfoot watched carefully. I repeated the gesture, making it clear. I won't share this. I won't expose you. The Bigfoot made a sound, long and resonant. It stepped closer than it ever had before, maybe 15 feet away, close enough that I could see its eyes clearly, see the intelligence and wariness and desperate hope there. It touched its scarred chest with one hand, the damaged one with missing fingers. Then it pointed at me. The message was clear. Your people did this to me. Will you do the same? Can you be different? I shook my head slowly, placed my hand over my heart in what I hoped was a universal gesture of sincerity. I won't hurt you. I won't betray you. I promise. The Bigfoot held my gaze for a long moment. Then it made a sound I'd learned meant understanding, acceptance. It believed me. Or maybe it just desperately wanted to believe that one human could be different, Either way, something fundamental changed between us in that moment. The distance remained, the wariness stayed. But there was trust now, fragile and tentative. The Bigfoot had shown me its deepest wounds and greatest losses, had made itself vulnerable to the one species that had destroyed everything it loved, and I had chosen not to exploit that vulnerability, had promised protection instead of exposure. The Bigfoot became focused on teaching after that, like it had made a decision about how to spend whatever time we had left together. It would appear in the morning and demonstrate things, patient and deliberate, making sure I understood before moving to the next lesson. It showed me how to find water by listening to the earth, placed its ear against rocks, tapped them with its knuckles. The sound would change when underground streams were nearby. High-pitched meant far away, deeper tones meant close. It made me try, correcting my technique until I could hear the difference. The Bigfoot taught me about plants, which ones were medicinal, which were poison. It would bring samples, crushing leaves between its fingers, let me smell them, see them, understand the distinctions. Then it would point to its own injuries, show me which plants it had used for healing. One plant with broad leaves got chewed into a paste, then placed on my leg where the splint created pressure sores. The paste reduced the inflammation, eased the pain. The Bigfoot watched to make sure I understood which plant it was, where to find it. These weren't random demonstrations. The Bigfoot was passing on knowledge, cultural information that had probably been handed down through generations, teaching me the way it would teach its own children if it had any left. I realized it was making me a keeper of this information, ensuring that when it died, something of its people's knowledge would survive through me. The thought was overwhelming. I was a wildlife photographer with a broken leg, not an anthropologist or ethnobotanist. But the Bigfoot didn't care about my credentials. It just needed someone to remember. On what I thought might be the fourth day, the Bigfoot showed me something different: how to move through the forest without leaving trace. It demonstrated a walking pattern that disturbed minimal vegetation, stepping on stones when possible, avoiding soft ground that would hold prints. It showed me how to break branches without obvious human patterns, how to create natural-looking disturbances that other people would mistake for wind damage or animal activity. These were survival skills for a species that had learned to hide. Techniques developed over generations of avoiding human detection. The Bigfoot was teaching me not just how to survive in wilderness, but how to disappear into it. Why was it teaching me this? Did it think I'd need to hide too? Or was this simply the knowledge it had, the only gift it could offer? I recorded everything verbally for the audio equipment. Not scientific documentation, but personal narrative. This happened. This is what it showed me. This is what I think it means. The Bigfoot would pause during these narrations, listening to my voice. Sometimes it would make sounds in response, like it was adding its own commentary to my observations. We were creating a record together, not of its existence for the world, but of our interaction for myself. Proof that this happened, that I learned these things, that a Bigfoot trusted me enough to share its culture. That evening, the Bigfoot did something it hadn't done before. It sat down maybe 20 feet from me, close enough that we could see each other clearly in the fading light, and it started making sounds, long, complex vocalizations that had rhythm and pattern, not random noise, but structured communication. Stories, I realized. The Bigfoot was telling me stories in a language I couldn't understand, but with enough gesture and intonation that I caught fragments of meaning. I listened to the Bigfoot's vocalizations for over an hour as darkness fell around us. The sounds had structure, repeated phrases that seemed to indicate names or places, rising tones that suggested questions, falling tones that implied conclusions. The Bigfoot would point to the direction of the burial site when making certain sounds, point to its own scars when making others, touch its chest, touch the ground, touch the trees around us, creating context for a language I couldn't speak but was beginning to feel. It was telling me its history, the story of its people in these mountains, what they'd been and what they'd become, a narrative of loss and survival and finally solitude. I understood that I was receiving something precious, not data or evidence, but testimony. A dying culture's attempt to be remembered by someone, anyone, even if that someone was human. When the Bigfoot finished, It made a gesture toward me. Your turn. Tell me your story. I didn't know where to start. My life seemed trivial compared to what the Bigfoot had endured, but I tried anyway, speaking quietly about Linda and Jason, about choosing cameras over family, about measuring my worth by images captured instead of relationships maintained. The Bigfoot listened with focused attention. When I mentioned Jason, I pulled out the small photograph I kept in my wallet. A 6-year-old boy in a soccer uniform, smiling at something outside the frame. I held up the photo, let the Bigfoot see it. My son, my family, the people I'd been neglecting while chasing stories in wilderness. The Bigfoot made a soft sound, leaned forward slightly. It understood family, understood the bond between parent and child. Maybe it was thinking about the small grave marker, about what it had lost. It gestured at the photo, then at me, then made a motion like pushing. Go back, return to them. But I shook my head. Not yet. You're sick. I can hear it in your breathing. I'd noticed it over the past day. The Bigfoot's breathing had become labored, slightly wet. It moved more stiffly, rested more frequently. It was ill, something respiratory that was getting worse. The Bigfoot touched its chest, coughed quietly, nodded. It knew it was sick, knew it was probably dying. That's why it was teaching me so urgently. That's why it was passing on knowledge and stories. This might be its last chance to ensure something of its culture survived. I felt a surge of helplessness. I had basic first aid training, but nothing that could treat serious illness. No antibiotics, no medical equipment. I couldn't save the Bigfoot any more than it could fully heal my leg. We were two beings in the wilderness, both damaged, both dying in our own ways. All we could offer each other was presence and witness. The Bigfoot seemed to understand my distress. It made a sound I'd learned meant acceptance, peace. It wasn't asking me to save it, just to remember it. That night, the Bigfoot stayed closer than ever before, maybe 10 feet away, near enough that I could hear every breath, every small movement. It was keeping watch again, protecting me from night predators. But also, I thought, it didn't want to be alone. Not anymore. Not with death approaching. We sat in darkness together, two impossible companions, and I thought about what we'd become to each other. Not friends exactly, the distance was too great, but something meaningful. Connected by circumstance and choice, by trauma survived and trust offered. Morning brought helicopters. I heard them before I saw them, the distinctive chop of rotors echoing through the ravine. Search and rescue had finally expanded their perimeter enough to reach this area. The Bigfoot heard them too. It stood immediately, made a sound of alarm, looked at me, then at the sky, then back at me. It was asking a question. Will you tell them about me? Will you break your promise now that rescue is here? I shook my head firmly, made the same gesture I'd made before, the one for keeping secrets, for protecting rather than exposing. The Bigfoot held my gaze for a long moment. Then it did something that made my throat tight. It reached out with its good hand, the one with all its fingers, and briefly touched my shoulder. Just a moment of contact, then it pulled back. Thank you, that gesture said. For keeping your word, for being different. Then it was gone. Moving faster than I'd seen before despite its illness, disappearing into the forest with practiced silence. By the time the helicopter flew directly overhead, the Bigfoot had vanished completely. I looked at where it had been standing, saw no trace of its presence, no footprints on the rock, no disturbed vegetation. It knew how to disappear, had probably done it hundreds of times when humans came too close. The helicopter circled twice, then moved on. They hadn't seen me yet, hidden in the ravine beneath tree cover. I had, maybe 10 minutes before they circled back or ground teams arrived. 10 minutes to make a final decision. I looked at my notebook, filled with observations about the Bigfoot's behavior. Detailed notes about its injuries, its intelligence, its cultural practices. Evidence that would revolutionize primatology and cryptozoology. I tore out every page that mentioned the Bigfoot directly, ripped them into small pieces, scattered them in the stream, watched the paper dissolve and wash away. My audio recorder had captured everything. The Bigfoot's vocalizations, its movements, our interactions, hours of proof that it existed. I considered destroying the tapes, but I couldn't. This was the only record of what had happened, of what I'd learned. Instead, I buried the recorder and spare tapes under rocks, marked the location mentally. I'd retrieve them later, keep them hidden. Private proof, not public evidence. When the rescue team finally found me an hour later, I was ready with my story. I'd fallen while photographing wildlife, broken my leg, survived on my own until they arrived, splinted the leg myself, found the stream for water, ate berries and roots I recognized from field guides. The team leader, a man in his 40s with search and rescue patches on his jacket, looked skeptical. "You survived 5 days alone with a broken leg? No shelter, no supplies?" "I made it work. I've spent years in wilderness. You learn to manage." They stabilized my leg properly, started preparing me for evacuation. One of the younger rescuers found my sleeping bag, my water bottle. This gear was arranged pretty carefully for someone with a broken leg. I forced a weak smile. "You'd be surprised what you can do when the alternative is dying." They accepted the explanation because people believe what makes sense to them. The idea that I'd survived alone was barely plausible. The truth would have been impossible. As they lifted me into the helicopter, I looked back at the ravine. Saw nothing, no movement. But I knew the Bigfoot was there, watching from hiding, making sure I actually left. The hospital in Portland kept me for a week. Surgery to properly set my leg, pins and plates to hold the bones in position, physical therapy to regain mobility. Endless questions from doctors about how I'd survived so long with such severe injuries. I stuck to my story, told them I'd been lucky, that my wilderness training had kicked in, that survival instinct was a powerful thing. They documented it as an impressive case of self-rescue. Linda came immediately, brought Jason with her. My son looked scared, seeing me in the hospital bed with my leg elevated and bandaged. I hadn't realized how much my absence would affect him until I saw his face. He'd thought I was dead. They'd told him I was missing, that people were searching. For 5 days he'd gone to bed thinking his father might never come home. I pulled him close with one arm, felt him crying against my chest. Linda stood beside the bed, her face showing relief and anger in equal measure. "You were being reckless again, weren't you? Off trail, alone, pushing boundaries." She wasn't wrong, but I couldn't explain what had really happened, why those reckless choices had led to something that changed everything. "I'm sorry. You're right. I was careless." Linda studied my face, looking for something. She knew me well enough to sense that more had happened than I was saying. But she didn't push. Maybe she didn't want to know. Jason stayed close to me the entire visit, like he was afraid I'd disappear if he let go. I kept my arm around him, present in a way I'd never managed before. That night, alone in my hospital room, I thought about the Bigfoot sitting beside those grave markers, mourning its lost family while I'd been neglecting mine, spending its final days teaching a stranger rather than giving up to isolation. I'd learned something in that ravine, not about Bigfoot biology or cryptozoology, but about what mattered, about presence, about showing up, about choosing connection over achievement. My National Geographic editor visited later that week, wanted to know what footage I'd gotten before the accident, whether anything was salvageable for the story. I told him all my equipment was damaged in the fall, film exposed, cameras broken, recordings destroyed, complete loss. He was disappointed but understanding. "These things happen in the field. We'll reschedule when you're healed." But I knew I wouldn't be rescheduling, not for the kind of work I'd been doing, not for the aggressive, intrusive documentation that had defined my career. Something had died in that ravine, along with my old philosophy, the part of me that measured worth by images captured, by stories exploited, by nature reduced to content. The Bigfoot had shown me a different way, not through words or philosophy, but through example, through choosing to help despite trauma, through protecting even when afraid, through sharing knowledge even with death approaching. I couldn't be what the Bigfoot was, but I could try to be less of what I'd been, less extractive, less aggressive, less certain that my purposes justified any cost to others. I could choose presence over productivity, connection over achievement, protection over exploitation. I could go home to my family and actually be there. 2 months later, I quit National Geographic, told them I was done with wildlife photography, that the accident had changed my priorities. They thought I had PTSD, suggested therapy and time off. I let them believe that. I started over, completely. Sold my wildlife photography equipment, kept only basic landscape gear, took a job with a conservation group documenting threatened ecosystems. The pay was a fraction of what I'd made before, but the work felt right. Instead of pursuing animals into their private moments, I photographed empty places, forests without humans, rivers without development, mountains that existed beyond our reach. Beauty that didn't require intrusion to appreciate. My relationship with Linda didn't magically fix itself, but I stopped expecting her to accommodate my absence. Started being present for dinners, for Jason's bedtime, for the small moments that build actual family. Jason noticed the change immediately. His father, the stranger who occasionally appeared with exciting stories, had been replaced by someone who showed up consistently, who helped with homework, attended soccer games, cooked breakfast on weekends. He didn't trust it at first, kept waiting for me to leave again, to choose some assignment over him. But I didn't. I stayed, even when staying was boring, even when other opportunities appeared. I made annual trips back to Mount Hood, always alone. Would hike to the ravine where I'd spent that weekend, leave offerings, flowers in summer, food in winter, small acknowledgments that I remembered. I never saw the Bigfoot again, never heard its vocalizations or found new traces of its presence. I told myself it had survived, had moved deeper into wilderness, had found some way to continue. But I suspected the truth was simpler. The illness I'd heard in its breathing had probably worsened. Alone and sick, the Bigfoot had likely died not long after I left. Those graves in the clearing were probably 4 now, instead of 3. I retrieved my audio recordings from where I'd hidden them 6 months after the incident, brought them home, locked them in a safe deposit box under a false name. Evidence I'd never share, proof I'd carry to my grave. Sometimes late at night I'd listen to those tapes, hear the Bigfoot's vocalizations, my own narration, the sounds of those 3 days. Remember what it felt like to be trusted by something that had every reason to let me die. Linda asked once what had really happened in those mountains. We were lying in bed 10 years after the incident. Jason was 16, preparing for college. Our marriage had become something real, built on presence rather than absence. "Something changed you," she said quietly. "In that ravine. You came back different." I did. "Are you going to tell me what it was?" I thought about the Bigfoot showing me its scars, about the graves in the clearing, about the choice to protect rather than expose. "No, but it was important. It's why I'm still here with you and Jason, why I stopped running." Linda accepted that, the way she accepted most things about me by then. She knew me well enough to recognize when something was sacred, when pushing would break something that needed to stay intact. Jason grew up with a father who was present, who showed up, who chose family over achievement. He went to college, got married, had children of his own. He knew me as someone stable and reliable. He had no idea who I'd been before, what I'd valued, what I'd sacrificed for career, how close I'd come to losing everything that mattered. The Bigfoot had saved more than my life in that ravine. It had saved my family by teaching me what actually deserved protection. 40 years passed quietly. Jason built his own life, had his own family. Linda and I grew old together, really together this time. I continued conservation work until my hands got too unsteady for camera operation. I thought about the Bigfoot often, wondered if there were others hidden in wilderness areas across the country, living in the margins, avoiding humans, carrying trauma that got passed down through generations. Probably not. The evidence suggested they were nearly extinct, if not completely. Too many people, too little wilderness, too much history of violence against anything we didn't understand. The Bigfoot I'd met was probably among the last, maybe the last in the Cascade region, dying alone because its species had learned too late that humans couldn't be trusted. I never tried to find another one, never went looking for additional evidence. I'd made a promise, and I kept it for 4 decades. Then, the cancer diagnosis came. Pancreatic, aggressive, already metastasized by the time they found it. The doctor gave me a year, maybe less. I started putting my affairs in order, going through belongings accumulated over a lifetime. That's when Jason found the old recording equipment in my storage unit. The tapes I'd kept hidden, locked in a box that I'd moved from house to house without ever opening. He brought them to me at the hospice facility, curious. "Dad, what are these? Why did you keep old cassette tapes in a locked box?" I looked at those tapes, at the only physical evidence of what had happened in 1984. 40 years of secrets contained in magnetic tape and plastic casings. Jason sat beside my bed, holding the box. "There's something you want to tell me, isn't there? About what really happened when you broke your leg." He'd figured it out somehow. Maybe the change in me had been obvious enough that he'd always questioned the official story. Maybe he'd just learned to read me well enough to know when I was hiding something. I was dying. Linda was already gone, passed away 3 years before. Jason was the only person left who deserved the truth, so I told him. Everything. The pursuit of Bigfoot tracks, the fall, the 5 days with a being that shouldn't exist, the scars, the graves, the lessons taught in darkness by something that had every reason to let me die. Jason listened without interrupting. When I finished, he sat in silence for a long time. Finally, he spoke. "That's why you changed. Why you came back different." "Yes." "Do you have proof? These tapes, do they have evidence?" I nodded toward the box. "Everything's there. Its vocalizations, my narration, all of it. Proof that Bigfoot exists, that it's intelligent, that it has culture and language, and everything we claim makes us special." Jason picked up one of the tapes, turned it over in his hands. "And you never told anyone? Never published it, never tried to prove what you'd experienced, because that Bigfoot trusted me, showed me its family's graves, taught me its culture, kept me alive when it could have walked away. Exposing it would have betrayed everything it gave me. What do you want me to do with these? With this information? That's your choice now. I'm dying. The secret dies with me unless you decide otherwise." Jason took the tapes home, told me he needed time to process, to decide what was right. I understood. I'd had 40 years to live with the truth. He'd just learned it existed. 2 weeks later, he came back. He'd listened to every tape, heard everything. The Bigfoot sounds, my narration, the audio documentation of 3 days that changed my life. He sat beside my bed, and I could see he'd been crying. "I heard it, Dad. The Bigfoot. It's real, all of it. The way it sounded when it was grieving at those graves. I heard everything." He paused, struggling with something. "I want to believe this was real. But I'm also thinking, could it have been hallucinations? Pain and isolation playing tricks on your mind? It's real. But I understand why you'd question it. That's healthy skepticism. The change in you was real. That's not debatable. You came back from that mountain different, present, actually there for me and Mom. That transformation lasted 40 years. Jason pulled out his phone, showed me something. A website about Bigfoot research organizations, groups that investigated sightings and collected evidence. I could give them the tapes, prove that Bigfoot exists. Your experience could change everything we know about primate evolution, about what's possible. I looked at my son, at the man he'd become. Thoughtful, ethical, struggling with a question that had no easy answer. But that's not what the Bigfoot wanted, is it? It trusted you to keep the secret, to protect its resting place, to let it die in peace. No, that's not what it wanted. Jason put his phone away. I hiked to the location you described, used the coordinates from your recordings. Took me 2 days to find it. You went there? I found the clearing. The grave markers, 4 of them now instead of 3. They're still there, weathered but maintained by something. 4 graves. The Bigfoot had died, been buried by what? By another of its kind? Or had it prepared its own resting place before death? There's something else, Dad. I found evidence, recent. Footprints near the site, hair samples. Something still visits those graves regularly. My breath caught. After 40 years, could there still be Bigfoot in those mountains? I don't know what I found. Could be another Bigfoot, could be something else. But whatever it is, it's protecting that place, keeping it sacred. Jason leaned forward, held my hand. I'm going to do what you did. I'm going to keep the secret. Not because I'm sure about what exists, but because those beings, whoever or whatever they are, they've earned the right to be left alone. Are you certain? This could be the biggest discovery in modern science. I'm certain that some things are more important than discovery. You taught me that, even if you never explained why until now. Some beings deserve protection more than they deserve exposure. I felt tears building. My son understood. After everything, he'd learned the same lesson the Bigfoot had taught me. What will you do with the recordings? Jason pulled out a lighter, held it where I could see. With your permission, I'm going to destroy them. All of them except one copy I'll keep private. If I die without telling anyone, the secret dies with me. And if someone finds that place accidentally, then they find it. But we're not going to lead them there. We're not going to make it easy. I died 2 weeks after that conversation. Peacefully, Jason told me later, though I don't remember the moment itself. Just a gradual fading, pain receding, awareness dissolving into something quiet. But this story doesn't end with my death. Jason made sure of that by writing this account, combining his perspective with mine, creating a record that honors truth while protecting what needs protection. Jason kept his promise completely. He destroyed all the audio recordings except for one copy he locked away. Never told anyone else what I'd experienced. Never tried to prove Bigfoot's existence. He visits the burial site once a year, maintaining the tradition I started. Leaves offerings, sits with the graves, acknowledges that something sacred exists in those mountains. He's seen the footprints I mentioned, massive, bipedal, fresh. Evidence that at least one Bigfoot still survives in that region, still maintains those grave markers, still mourns its lost family. But Jason doesn't photograph the prints, doesn't collect samples, doesn't try to document or prove anything. He just notes their presence and moves on. His daughter, my granddaughter, asked him once why he takes those solo hiking trips every year, why he goes to the same remote location, brings flowers, spends hours there alone. Jason told her it's a promise to someone who deserved better than the world gave them. She accepted that answer without pushing for details. Maybe someday when Jason is dying like I was, he'll tell her the full truth. Pass on the responsibility of keeping this secret, of protecting beings that our species has hunted to near extinction. Or maybe the secret will die with him. Maybe that's what the Bigfoot would want. Not to be remembered through stories, but to be left alone in whatever wilderness remains. Jason struggles sometimes with his decision. Late at night, he questions whether he's doing the right thing by hiding evidence that could change everything we know. But then he remembers what I told him about the Bigfoot scars, about the graves of its murdered family, about how it kept me alive despite having every reason to let me die. And he remembers my transformation, how I came back from that mountain different, present, actually showing up for the people who needed me. Those lessons matter more than any scientific discovery. The understanding that some beings have earned the right to privacy, that protection and control are different things, that one species' progress often means another's extinction. We ask why Bigfoot avoids humans. People speculate about fear or shyness or simple animal wariness. They imagine Bigfoot as primitive, as less than human. My father learned the answer in that ravine 40 years ago. Bigfoot avoids us not because they're animals unable to understand us. They avoid us because they're intelligent enough to understand us perfectly. They remember what we've forgotten, that every time they trusted humans, they lost everything, that our curiosity leads to their death, that our need to document and prove and possess destroys whatever it touches. They avoid us because we're the most dangerous thing in the forest, not because we're strong or fast, but because we can't leave anything alone. Can't let mystery exist without solving it, can't encounter something rare without capturing it. Bigfoot has learned through generations of trauma that the kindest thing humans can do is stay away. My father honored that lesson. Now I do too. And maybe, if you're reading this, you'll understand why some discoveries deserve to stay hidden, why some beings have earned our protection more than our attention.